In this screencast, I'm going to teach you a benefit of using PDO as a database engine for your PHP scripts. If you're following along with the text, you know that author is using the MySQLi engine. You may have seen my video last week on the differences between MySQLi and PDO. Well, one of the nice things about PDO is it offers something called binding, and you can bind values or parameters to your manipulations of your database in all your SQL queries. And what that means is you can create a layer of protection between directly inserting variables into the query. Let's go to php.net and look at the differences between bind value and bind parameter. Here I'm in the page for binding a value. And what this will do is simply create a layer of protection between an SQL query and the time when we can actually pass values into that query. So let's look at an example. Sometimes these are a little bit easier to understand. So if you look at this, we have variables that equal certain values. This one's an integer and this one's a string. Then we have our preparation statement, which is our prepared statement, which has select three fields from a table called fruit, where calories might be less than the calories you're searching for, and the color might be equal to a color you're looking for. So this is the statement I'm talking about. Instead of putting a variable right inside the query here, we can bind the value later to the query before we execute it. So what we're doing right now is binding the value for wherever it says :calories, which is up here, and we're replacing it with the actual variable calories, which equals 150, and telling PDO, hey, this had better be an integer. And that's part of the layer of preparation. In the next line, we're binding a value, and this one's going to replace the color reference up here with the variable color, and we're telling PDO, hey, this is going to be a string. So let's go ahead and take a look at our insert statement from last week. This is the insert statement that many of you used for your homework assignment, where you were inserting values from a contact form. So right now you see I'm directly passing a variable called full name into this statement. Well, if I wanted to change it to a bind value, I could remove the quotes like that. And now I would need to do SQL equals, and I would do bind value like this, and I would call on the full name to be replaced with the variable itself, and then I would call on PDO, and it's 2 colons, and I would do param underscore str like this. Now I'm going to go ahead and check my work here just to make sure it's the same. And yes, up here you see there's no quotes. Here you see there's quotes, the variable, and then its type of value. Now since it's a full name, it's going to be a string. So I'm going to go with this, and then we'll run a test. So we'll go to our insert statement right here, and I'll put Brad Selwood, and we'll enter. And I get an immediate broken section. So let's go to the part that we're talking about. And you know what it is? I have to actually bind the value this way. If you look at my PDO statement here, let's look at the examples again. You see how the bound occurs because we're not making it equal to anything, but we have to instantiate that object. This is an object that is the connection. So now I'm binding the value into that query. And that was my mistake. So I'm going to go back, we're going to hit refresh, and hopefully we can go ahead and add our value. And it looks like we didn't get an error. If I go to my database, I should see Brad Selwood. And that is how you can bind a value. You can also use a quotation. So if I use a quotation like this, and then go to the bound value 1, because it's numeric based, I would be looking for my first quotation, my first question mark, replacing it with full name in parameter string. So let's go to the bind value and just double check and make sure my work is correct, and it looks like it is. Here's bind value 1 and 2 for that one, and then you pass your values. So now I'm going to go ahead and I prefer honestly to use the question marks. It's just a little bit easier for me to remember, but I do like to have that one layer of separation. So I'm going to type in Dave Keon's name, and it looks like I have no problem there. Hit refresh, and I've bound the value of both using both methods, the question mark and the placeholder, the named placeholder. So now I want to show you bind param. Now, one of the differences between bind param and bind value is that bind parameter passes values by reference. And I'm going to go to, this is an example of it. This is bind parameter. The only difference is the instead of having bind value, you bind parameter. And that means it passes the value as a reference only at the time of execution. And they should be, here we go, this right here. Unlike PDO statement bind value, the variable is bound as a reference and will only be evaluated at the time that PDO statement execute is called, whereas the bind value will evaluate before execute calls. So, that said, don't be afraid to do something like this. It would be the same value, the same type of thing, except it's only going to work in execution. So you could argue that this is a little bit safer because it's not evaluated earlier, but we're talking apples and oranges at this point. One of the nice things about this is the fact that it does create that layer of separation. So I hope you appreciate that. Now let's go back and just run a quick test on our, we'll do Tom Webster. Enter value, and we're good, and that was the bind parameter. Now we don't see any performance difference on this side. Looks like I hit Dave Keon twice, which is another issue, but for now, this is how we can bind values and pass them later into a query. Now you can do this with any type of query where there's a variable inside your query, and it is recommended. It's a nice thing to do. All right, so that is one of the reasons why I enjoy PDO a lot and why I'm showing it for you this course. There are a few others that we'll get to, but if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.